Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Today we have a guest who we've had actually here on the show before. Dan is back. Hi, Dan.
Hi, guys. It's great to be back. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you back. So Dan's actually been on, I think, 2 times before, and we've talked about how he basically lives the INFP dream at this point. If you haven't heard the podcast with him before, go back and listen to those. We unpack some of the stuff he's been up to. So let me give you a little story. If you haven't heard those 2 podcasts, Dan has basically built a life for himself where, as an INFP in the Myers-Briggs system, he's been able to travel almost full time, stay with friends when he's not traveling, make a little extra money here and there, and then pour a lot of resource and time into being basically a professional hiker at this point. Would you agree with that, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, as much as that sort of thing goes, I don't think you can get a degree in hiking.
No, certainly not. But I think the last time we had you on the show, you had just finished hiking the entire Appalachian Trail. And that's here in the United States. It's a trail on the eastern side of the United States going through the Appalachian Mountains, starting up in Maine and ending in northern Georgia. What did it take you, like 4 or 5 months to do that?
That was roughly 5.5 months.
Okay. So 5.5 months to do that. And then you just finished doing the Pacific Crest Trail on the mountains on the west side of the United States. So you started at the border of Mexico and went all the way to Canada, right?
Yeah, so that was a little bit longer of a hike. It's about 500 miles longer, and took time-wise, it wasn't much difference though. So I just had that adventure, 2,650 some odd miles.
And that took you...
roughly about the same time as the Appalachian Trail. It was 5.5 to 6 months. The time-wise, it was just under 6 months, but you take days off and get times to rest and all of that. Haven't done the math of how much rest time I took, but so somewhere between 5.5 months.
And what's your total mileage now? Like, how many miles have you through hiked?
Long distance hiking is a little over 4,800 miles. And then with all the other backpacking trips and stuff, I'm definitely well over 5,000 miles at this point.
So 5,000 miles reminds me of the Proclaimers. What is that? I'll walk 5,000 miles song.
It was 500 miles in the song. And
that's right.
Yeah, I actually have a little story about that. When I got to the 1,000-mile point, so milestones are a really big deal to hikers. The first 100 miles is a big deal, and then every 100 miles after that for a while is a big deal, and then you get to 500, and that's a big deal. When I got to the 1,000-mile point, this was a really big deal, the first 1,000-mile marker. And there was a group of hikers that were sitting there beside the trail, taking a break right at the 1,000-mile point. And I didn't know any of them. But I walked up and everybody's like, yay, 1,000 miles, congratulations. And, we're all kind of in this celebratory mood. And so I said, okay, everybody, we've all got to sing the 500-mile song, because the way the chorus goes is he walks 500 and then 500 more to walk 1,000 miles. And we've just walked 1,000 miles. So I tried to get all these total random strangers to do a video of us singing that song together. Half of them went with it. So I had enough FI, mojo manipulation there to get half of them to do this goofy video song with me of us singing that song together at the 1,000-mile mark. The other 3 were just looking at me like, oh my God, what did we got into?
Well, and I think what's hilarious, it seems, first of all, from the stories you've told me, it seems like hikers are partiers.
Yes, often. I mean, that's definitely not an unearned stereotype.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of moments, goofy moments, because you're doing something that's so intense. And there are moments, and even when we talked about this in the last podcast, where your life is kind of at times in danger because of the conditions that you're in. And so when you have these moments when you're celebrating, and I mean, how many miles do you walk a day on average? It was something insane, like 25 or 30 miles a day.
It varies with the section you're in. For example, the Sierra Nevada mountains through central part of California, you definitely slow down a lot through there. It's the most difficult section. But generally somewhere in the area of 25 miles up into the 30s in Oregon.
Yeah. And so you've got this intensity that you're doing and all this exertion and these moments, these sort of hairy moments. I can imagine that when you're able to cut loose, you're like, those are well-earned moments.
Yeah, and it doesn't take much to just enjoy this these moments with total strangers. It's one of the great things about that kind of experience is everybody is so on the same level with each other, and they're really, really excited and very positive.
But it also, walking that much affords you a ton of time to just be alone and inside your own head.
Yeah, and you can kind of control that, how much you experience that as a person, as an individual person, if you're doing an adventure like that. Because some people listen to, things like audiobooks or podcasts or music while they're hiking. I don't. I'm very comfortable being alone with my thoughts. So this is 10 to 12 hours a day, every day. Most of the time I'm hiking by myself, not 100% of the time, but most of the time I am alone with my thoughts. And so, yeah, there's a lot of time to just think. And that has it's helped me come up with some really powerful things. I think in the last time I was with you guys, when we were talking about my adventure on the Appalachian Trail, we talked about some of the ahas that I had while doing that. And so those happen from little things to bigger things. An example of a little thing I think on the last podcast, I talked about a rule I made for myself, which is always eat berries. If there's ripe berries that are edible that you find along the trail, the rule I had was you always stop and eat some. So I continued that rule on this hike, and there was a lot of berries. But I also added a second rule to my hiking experience, and that is whenever possible, say yes. So whatever it is, somebody wants you to go do something with them, somebody offers you something, someone invites you to their home, whatever it is, if it's at all possible, say yes. And that one I'm really going to try to carry forward into life in general.
So from a typology standpoint, as an INFP, if you're a new listener, we're talking about growth strategies for an INFP. In this particular question, I'm going to ask Dan. In your car model, Dan, you lead with a process called introverted feeling, meaning that's your driver of authenticity. And your growth position, your co-pilot, is extroverted intuition. We've nicknamed it exploration. It's about getting into the outer world. It's about pushing buttons, experimenting, basically saying yes to a lot more in life. Has this been a growth path for you since you started that rule?
Yeah. It was probably in the early part of this hike on the Pacific Crest Trail that I sort of came up with that idea. I mean, I'm not by any means the first person to come up with that idea, but it sort of gelled in my head of like, yeah, the thing to do is say yes whenever possible and just be open to experiences. And because of that, I've had a number of just really everything from really beautiful, sweet experiences with people doing kind things for me or just little bits of fun that have happened to things that are kind of life-altering. Because
life-altering.
Yeah.
Really?
Of being willing to say yes. Yeah, really.
Do you have an example of something like that?
Sure, I probably could think of a couple, but the biggest one for me on this particular hike, it was a day that started out really tough, it was kind of interesting because one of the things that people don't always realize if they've never done an adventure like this is that the biggest challenges you face are mental. Climbing the highest pass, climbing Forester Pass, 13,200 feet. That's not the toughest challenge. Deciding to summit Mount Whitney, 14,500, that's not the toughest challenge. Cold nights, no, the toughest challenges are mental, of days when, for whatever reason, everyone has bad days, and when you're trying to keep yourself going, those bad days often show up in when you just don't have any mental energy left, or you're in a very bad space. So this goes back to July of this year, and of course, here in the U.S., we have the 4th of July is the national holiday. It's what we call Independence Day, and it's a big deal here in the United States. And so the night of the 4th of July, I had this wonderfully pleasant evening. I had my hammock hanging on the side of a mountain overlooking Lake Tahoe. And as the sun was setting, they started launching fireworks out over Lake Tahoe. And I had this little plastic flask. I had bought some probably really cheap, crappy red wine and carried it out in this plastic flask. And I had some cheese with me. And I sat there in my hammock, rocking back and forth, sipping some wine, eating cheese, and watching fireworks over Lake Tahoe in this quiet of the forest. It was incredibly beautiful and peaceful and relaxing. For whatever reason, though, the next morning, July 5th, I woke up in a really, really bad mental place. And I don't know exactly why that was. It was a nice, beautiful morning. The sun was shining and my body was fine. You know, you have a little bit of aches and pains, but I didn't have anything significant I was worried about. But I was in this very bad place mentally. And what was going on in my mind, and I'll share it, is so going back to the previous time I was here, I talked about one of my big epiphanies on the Appalachian Trail, which is where I kind of finally figured out what my message was, what the thing I have to say to the world is, which I think for anybody is important, especially I would say for an FI primary. What is your authentic message that you have is very important to us. And I finally figured that out when I was on the Appalachian Trail, and that was that the simple statement of beauty is everywhere. And I'm here to remind people that we live in an incredibly beautiful world and it's all around us all the time. And there's so much of it that we're missing because we're so busy. We're not paying attention. We overlook it all the time. And so my job is to help people remember and see all this incredible beauty around them. So I'm a photographer, and that's the main way that I share that message with people, is by trying to capture it in photographs and share it with anybody who would be interested in seeing that, and hoping I can inspire them and move them and impact them in a way that helps them see the world a little bit differently now. So that was what I learned on the Appalachian Trail. Well, this morning, the 5th of July of this year, I woke up and I'm having, like I said, a really tough day. Like mentally, things were going bad for me. And what was going through my mind that morning was, okay, so a couple years ago, I figured out what my purpose is, and I figured out what my message is, and now I just realized that no one gives a shit. Like, the universe could care less what I have to say. I'm going to continue to take pictures of things that I think are beautiful that people aren't getting to see, because that's the only thing I know to do at this point, to express myself. I'm going to continue to travel to new places and experience this, but no one is going to really be impacted by this. I'm going to go through this the rest of my life, and at the end of my life, my ultimate impact on people in the world will be zilch. So that was what was going through my mind, and I was crushed. I packed up my camp for the night, or for the day, and started hiking out. I had about a dozen miles to go to get to a highway where I was going to go into a town and get some supplies. And it was just all I could do to make myself put one foot in front of the other, because it felt like all the zeal that I'd had, all the excitement was gone. And in a moment like that, I think I felt like I had lost everything I'd gained from all my work of trying to grow myself and trying to craft the kind of life that's right for me.
So you're on the trail. You have this amazing experience. July 4th, Independence Day here in the United States. Next day you have a downturn. You wake up the next morning feeling horrible. And when you feel the space, give me a kind of a context of how you usually approach this. As an INFP, do you have techniques to get yourself out of a funk typically? Do you typically indulge it? How do you usually navigate this space?
I think there's a little bit of indulging that happens, but it would look like indulging, I think, to a lot of people, but I think it was a matter of processing it. And I knew this one was going to take a while. Like, I've been through some pretty big changes in my life, and I've had some really tough down moments when I really needed time to process and go through whatever that thing was. And so, having had those experiences a number of times in the past, it was clear to me at that moment, this was not a little thing. This was going to take a while for me to process it and kind of get to some place where I'm going to be okay with it. It came to me as a realization, not a worry. It didn't come as this might be the case that no one cares. It was like this obvious truth that the universe had shown to me all at once. That's the way I experienced that. So it wasn't like I was stewing and worrying. It was more like, this is the new normal. This is my new reality. And what am I going to do about that? And I didn't have any obvious answers, but I started just sort of like imagining what my life was going to be like, what decisions I might make and directions I might take going forward. But it wasn't like, immediately started feeling better. In fact, the whole morning I was in a really bad funk, all the way into a place called Donner Pass, which is historically famous here in the U.S. for also very dark reasons. But it's near a town of Truckee, California. And my plan was to go hitchhike into Truckee to get supplies and get back out to the trail because I was out of food. So I'm hiking in that direction, getting toward Donner Pass. And as I mentioned, it was the 5th of July. It's a holiday time period here in the U.S. So there was tons of people in that area. Where the highway crosses the trail there at Donner Pass, there is a visitor center and a trailhead, and there's a bunch of other side trails. It's a very popular hiking area, northwest of Lake Tahoe. Beautiful, beautiful area. And so there's lots of people there for the long weekend and for whatever to enjoy themselves. Lots of day hikers and locals. And normally when I run into those kind of people and I'm hiking, I'm really chatty and friendly. I, tell them, about my adventures and stuff, because they always ask when you come through with a huge backpack and stuff and you're on that trail. So I'm really friendly and chatty normally. This time, all I could do was manage the most basic level of politeness. So, for example, I'm hiking along, people would see me kind of hiking fast with my head down, and they would step aside and let me go by on the trail. And I would just, without even really looking at them, I would just say thank you in this very subdued voice and keep going. So it was like, hike, thank you. And that was it. That was kind of all I had, I felt like, to offer in a realm of like just basic politeness even. And so that's kind of the way I was, carrying out my day heading into Donner Pass. And right toward the end of that little stretch of trail, as I'm getting close to the visitor center, there was lots of people around there, and I'm just passing all these people. I was hiking quite rapidly. And there was a couple right before I got to the road that I passed. They were hiking back to the trailhead as well. They were out for a day hike. And they stepped aside, let me by, and I just said thank you and nothing else. And I kept on going. And I go around another bend or two, and the trail comes out on this road that's not the main highway, but it's a road for the trailhead and the visitor center there. And it wasn't immediately obvious to me which direction I needed to go to get to the highway. But there was a porta potty there right by the side of the road. And as a hiker, you always take advantage of porta potties when they come up because you don't get them very often. It's a real rare luxury. So it's like, oh, porta potty. Even in a bad mood, you take advantage of a porta potty when it's just like shows up.
It reframes your entire experience of porta potties, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Like they're now a luxury, not like oh man.
Precisely. So, ooh, porta potty. So I go set my pack down and I use the porta potty, and I come back out and I was fidgeting with something on my pack, digging something out of or something. I don't remember exactly. And at that moment, this couple catches back up with me that I had just passed. And so I asked them which direction to go to get out to the highway. And they said, yeah, it's just around the bend there to the right. And so I said, thanks. I need to get into Truckee. I need to hitch a ride into Truckee, get some food. So I appreciate that. And so the couple goes, well, we're going into Truckee. Why don't you just ride with us? So I thought, okay, the rule is say yes. And so I didn't want to. I wanted to avoid being around people and talking to them if at all possible. And I don't know how I was going to imagine getting into town. It's like 11 miles off the trail to get into this town along this windy mountain road. But I didn't want to say yes to accepting this ride, but that's my rule. So I say yes, which was nice because then it saved me the standing out there with my thumb out waiting for a ride that I'm trying to catch. And then they cart me off into town.
Can I pause here for just a moment? We did a podcast a while back called Empowering Personal Rules, and this really is speaking to me here in a moment of you feeling, I don't know if you listening are getting just the level of bad feeling Dan was in at the moment he's doing this, right? So he's talked about not feeling good, and knowing Dan, he's a pretty cheerful guy, and he has a pretty good demeanor almost all the time. For him to be in a funk for this period of time, this long, isn't always typical. And even in the midst of not feeling like getting in this car with this couple, your empowering rule that was you're going to say yes to something. There was a rule that helped you here, even when your emotions didn't feel like doing something.
What's coming up for me, or what's obvious to me, is that this is not just a funk. I mean, that's of course how you experienced it, but your primary, or not primary, but one of your major motivations for doing this is that you feel like you're on mission. You feel like you are hiking, you're through hiking into these gorgeous parts of the world and taking pictures and sharing these pictures and sharing your experiences and your journey, through social media. And so this idea that people care, like like what you're sharing is actually being well received, and that other people can live vicariously through you, and you're helping open them up to different parts of the planet. Like these are parts of sort of the wind being at your back in general. And so the idea that nobody gives a shit, the idea that that's not accurate, nobody cares. Like you've got like how many thousands of miles to go to complete the Pacific Crest Trail at this point, going through Donner Pass? Like you're just into California, you're just at the Sierra Nevada. Like you haven't even gone through Northern California and 2 more states up into Canada. So one of your primary motivations for doing this entire thing at that moment was taken from you. So this is a real low point, actually.
Yeah, and the motivation to keep going was, from the beginning, was this kind of excitement about sharing my message, about reaching people, and just allowing them an opportunity to follow along and enjoy through me all this incredible beauty. And it is stunningly gorgeous, and the experience is amazing. And there's lots and lots of beauty for sure, and not just visual, like the way people are and the people you meet and all of that. There's so much to be shared there. And so that was the excitement that was making me hike for 25 miles a day or 30 or whatever it was, and getting me up over these incredibly high mountain passes, and the times when my body ached or I was hot or cold or soaking wet. It was that. And now I've got, like you're saying, I've got a lot of ways to go. I've got a hell of a lot of miles left, and the wind is not in the sails. The state I was in, a state of mind I was in at that moment, when I got into the car with this couple that offered me a ride, was probably the worst state I had been in years. Like I don't remember a time in recent history when I was feeling that miserable and that uninspired and just completely drained.
Did you think you were going to quit? Did it go through your mind like, maybe I should just stop this right now and figure it out later?
Only very briefly, but then like processing that and what that would have been like was more than I could handle at the time. So it got down to real basics. It was like, I'm going to go get my food supplies, get back out to the trail, and that's as far ahead as I'm going to think right now. I'm not going to even imagine what I'm going to do tomorrow or at the end of the day today.
Yeah. So you follow your personal rule. You always say yes. You get this car into Truckee, or this ride into Truckee with this couple. And so then what happens?
So as we're making our way into Truckee, the husband is driving, and I'll just give the first names of this couple because I haven't cleared with them to tell this story. But their names are Eric and Lori, and Eric is driving, and they're giving me the local tour, and I don't want to pretend I'm interested in the history of this place right now. I don't want to pretend to be interested in anything else around me, but they're giving me a ride into town. It's very nice of them. It's a great kindness to have that. So I'm trying my best to be conversational, probably not offering my best self at that moment. But they're very nice people. They're explaining to me this and that, about the area as we head into town. As we come into Truckee, there's a state park right there as you come into town. And Eric says, hey, I don't know if you're planning on spending the night here in Truckee, but if you are, this state park right here has a campground. It's a really nice setup, actually. They have showers and nice facility there. So it might be a good option for you if you're planning on spending the night. And so I said, well, I really haven't decided if I'm going to spend the night or not, but I'll think about that if I decide to. So thanks for the information. And Lori goes, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you take my number? And if you decide to spend the night, we're going to have some friends over for dinner. We're going to barbecue some salmon and some veggies, and you're welcome to join us. And so I was like, well, that's very kind of you. Thanks. So again, the rule is yes, when possible. So I take her number, and we ended up going to the grocery store first. I had to make actually 3 different stops in town. They were going to the grocery store anyway. So we go to the grocery store, and that's where we parted ways. And somewhere in the midst of the 3 stops that I had to make, which are all kind of in this central area there, so I was just walking from place to place, somewhere in there, I called the state park to see if they had any camping available. Because I thought, well, it's mid-afternoon now at this point. I've got to sort all my groceries and repack my pack and all of that. And it might be nice to not have to worry about getting back out to the trail today. So I called them up, and the campground is full, which makes sense. It's a holiday weekend. And so they were totally packed. So I sent a text back to Lori. I just said, hey, thanks for the offer, but the campground's full, so I'm just going to make my way back out to the trail and camp there. So it was like an excuse to say no in this case because, like, well, I don't have a place to stay. So then a minute later, I get a text back from Lori robbing me of my excuse to say no because she says, well, we have a guest room. Why don't you just come stay with us? These are complete strangers, by the way. Not only are they complete strangers to me, I find out somewhere in the course of all this, they have never picked up one of the hikers before. They live there in Truckee part of the time, and they commute long distance for work. Both of them do. And they've never picked up a hike before. So this is new to them as well. For whatever reason, they just decided to offer me a place to stay, a shower, which is amazing, and dinner. And so at that point, I lost my excuse to say no, so I had to say yes.
Yeah. Well, and it is extraordinary generosity because I've smelled you off the trail.
Yeah, it ain't good.
Yeah. Yeah, no, a through hiker is a different kind of funk. There's like a certain smell you have to get used to. And so they extend their generosity in giving you a ride. They extend generosity in getting you dinner or like making dinner for you. And then they extend generosity in giving you a place to stay.
At the moment, it was just starting to be a very nice, pleasant distraction from what I had experienced that morning. Just this beautiful human kindness. It didn't solve my problem for me. It didn't fix the fact that the universe didn't care what I had to say, but it did remind me that there's some really wonderful people out there who are very kind and generous. And so it took away some of the immediate sting of what was going on in my mind. And we ended up having a very pleasant evening. Their friends came over and we had a barbecue and we had great conversation. It was a nice evening. We're relaxing on the deck and talking and eating and all this stuff. And then later on, their friends leave and Eric goes, hey, do you by any chance like scotch? And I was like, I love scotch. So he pulls out this bottle of really good scotch. In fact, I think it's you and I have had this. He had a bottle of Belvini Doublewood, which is
it's good stuff.
Yeah. He poured me a couple fingers of that. It's not cheap scotch. And so we have some scotch and sit and relax and just chat and stuff. And that's kind of the way the whole evening went. I was chatting with the two of them and kind of telling about some of my story and why I was hiking and what I do out there and about my photography and all this sort of thing. And they told me about their lives and just kind of a really pleasant, simple getting to know each other on kind of a basic level. And then the next morning, they fixed me this nice big breakfast. We had this very easy, relaxed, slow morning. I told them I wasn't in a hurry. They had a couple phone calls they had to do for their work. And then later on, after breakfast and all this, and lots more conversation, they take me back out to the trail and give me hugs and see me off to go back on my way. And it left me definitely in a much better mood than I had been in before. You know, I had this narrative come up for me, the story that I had nothing to offer that anyone was going to care about, and that I was not going to have any opportunity to be meaningful to anyone or impact anyone or inspire anybody. That story came up, and it was kind of softened by this reminder of another story, which is that a part of these adventures is meeting wonderful people, and of all kinds, both the people you hike with and the people you meet along the trail, and that is tremendously rewarding. So it wasn't an answer to the problem that I thought I wanted, but it definitely left me in a better state of mind by kind of replacing I guess you could say, a very negative framed narrative with one is a lot more positive. So we part ways. I continue on with my journey, and a few days later, I get to some place where I can get cell signal again, because most of the time on the trail, you do not have any kind of cell service or anything like that. And I got a text from Lori just saying, hey, it was really great to meet you and hear about your story, and hope the hike is going great. And, just some really nice encouragement to continue on with the adventure. So I was doing better, moving forward a little bit. And one of the things that occurred to me was that nothing had actually changed, other than I was looking at it from a different angle because of a different story that I was processing at that time. It wasn't that I had fixed the problem or figured out how I was going to solve it, but there was a different story running in my mind. And it was a story that had come up over and over again throughout these adventures, is how wonderful people are out here. And I get to meet these really awesome human beings, and I get to make friends with them, and all of this. And that was a part of my experience, going back to the Appalachian Trail hike. And so the lesson that it kind of came up for me is my experience has a lot more to do with the story running in my head than it does the quote unquote reality of the situation that I'm in. That's what it dictates the kind of experience I'm having. So I started thinking more and more about narratives and stories, and particularly the meta narratives that we all have, the kind of the whole frame of who I see myself as, and how I view everything, and then how all these other little or smaller narratives fit into that. And some of them are closer to my meta narrative. And when I say my meta narrative, I'm probably referring to who I am as myself. I would call that my soul. Is the story of me is the meta narrative, and all these other narratives, like how I relate to people, how I'm going to express myself, the message I have, those are sub narratives that relate to that meta narrative. And some of them are closer to that kind of core. And so I have a narrative about Mexican food, and that narrative is you go to the West Coast if you want Mexican food that's any good. You don't get it on the East Coast. That's a narrative, but it's not particularly central to who I am, but it is a story I have, and I believe it's true. But some of my narratives, like the fact that, when I say it as a fact, what's not a fact, it's kind of funny that word just came out of my mouth, fact. There's nothing fact about this, but the story that my message and my reason for being on this planet is to help people see all this beauty, and that's the value that I bring. That's very core to who I am as a person. That's really central. So this was a lot bigger of a deal, but I was able to reframe my state of mind a little bit and get more in a positive frame by going to another core, very central narrative, and that is that people, human beings, are really wonderful, especially when you put yourself out there and take the risk of getting to know them and meeting total strangers and random mountain passes and things like that, that people will consistently show themselves to be amazing and to be beautiful. So these are the stories going on for me. These are the narratives that I'm playing with. And the more I think about it, the more I understand that this is what crafting your experience is largely about, is owning your narratives. For me to own my narratives means owning the fact that what I am sure something is true, that's a story. That's a story I'm telling myself. And when I tell myself that I don't have anything of value to give and the universe doesn't give a shit about what I have to say, that's just a story. When I tell myself that meeting strangers along my adventures will consistently yield great experiences, that's a story too. And I have a choice as to what kind of story I want to focus on and what kind of experience I want to have because of choosing the story, the narrative that I'm going to decide is the one I'm working with.
It's so funny to me how we get a sense of this when we have narratives that they're not negative toward us. So like if I started to move through the world thinking I'm the best at, everything, like I'm amazing at this and I'm the most amazing public speaker, and I started like moving through the world like that, believing that narrative, right? A lot of people will be like, you're not that great. You're not all that. And even me, I might have some self-doubt, like, man, am I really that? Am I really the greatest public speaker that's ever lived? Which I don't actually have that narrative, but I just picked one off the top of my head, right? But let's just say I had that narrative. It's so obvious to ourselves and others when we're doing that. But for some reason, when it's a narrative like, oh, I'm not good enough, or no one cares about my message, or I can't do this thing, for some reason we as humans wire that into ourselves as that's more real, that's more, and other people also. Like nobody's like, wait, are you sure that's not the case? Like for some reason I guess it's a narrative to say these are negative narratives, right? That's like a way to say it, but these narratives that aren't as helpful, for some reason we see them to be more real in a lot of ways. And this felt, I'm guessing, this idea, this notion, this story you were telling yourself, like, well, who am I to say anything important? The universe doesn't care. No one else cares. It probably felt more real than any positive thing you'd been telling yourself up to that point.
Yeah, that's why I say I experienced it as a realization. That's what it felt like. It's like, oh, this is the obvious, undeniable truth that the universe has just shown me. Yeah, that's the way it came across.
Yeah, realization isn't real. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think also, to piggyback off of your observation, Joel, I do think that when somebody says something that feels like negative self-talk, people will go, no, don't feel that way, because it's like it's the feeling that they want to help a friend recover from. Like don't feel bad, feel good, say things that are nice. But I don't think we actually address them as just narratives. I think we see it as negative self-talk, but if we see it as a story we're telling ourselves, and that we have the power to change the story, we don't just change the words we use, but we can change the entire narrative, like the entire thing. I think that's such an empowering position, and I actually feel like people resist that idea. It's almost as if everything is a narrative or a story, and we can just change it, then what is reality? Is there anything you can hold on to or grab onto? Like, what's real then? And I think it's a little unsettling for people. So have you ever experienced that yourself? Like this idea that if it's all just a narrative and story, then what's my ballast?
Yeah, sort of like the Sisyphus conundrum of like, why am I just rolling this rock up a hill every day, and I'm going to roll it up again tomorrow? I think that's come up for me a number of different times, that thought. But then once you think about it, though, if it all is just stories, then that means we have a great deal of ability to choose and to craft what that story looks like and how we want it to play out and the theme of that story. So that's the responsibility that I can, it's a responsibility and it's a power that I can take on for myself, of saying, if I'm going to like my story, the narrative I have, then it's my responsibility to craft it in a way that I like it. And it's also really, really damn empowering to understand that and to look at it from that perspective, because that is going to shape the experience that we have. We can farm that out. We can farm that story out, but then we're at the whim of whoever or whatever we've farmed the crafting of our story out to.
So I imagine that this idea of narratives and stories and being empowered to create your own narrative and story, this is not a new concept to you.
No, I had heard lots about this. You guys have had a number of podcasts where you've talked about this sort of thing, and we've had conversations just, sitting around and yakking about our narratives and our stories and how we can craft them. But it's like hiking a long trail. You can understand the idea of it, but until you start walking those miles, you don't really know what that experience feels like. And so having found myself had that happen kind of almost accidentally, and really seeing the result of that, of the difference between my narratives, and then pondering on then all of the things I had understood about narratives and their power and how we relate to them, then it was real for me like it had never been before. The reality of narratives and the power of owning my own narrative, because I experienced it and started actually kind of putting it into practice in a kind of a more fundamental level than I ever had before.
How did you take this concept and bring it into your day-to-day life, and what's been the result?
Well, going forward from that point, as I started to think about this, I certainly was a lot more conscious of what stories I'm telling myself and how everything I'm experiencing relates to a story, which is very fascinating to just kind of ponder that. When you experience something and it excites you or inspires you or it angers you, maybe you get outraged about something, that's all how those things are relating to our stories. That's the core of it. So having a real acute awareness kind of come up from that, it was an interesting kind of self-study in what stories I'm telling myself and what ones work well for me and what ones don't. So the ones that don't, we could say, well, you just drop that story. Sometimes that's kind of tough. So maybe what we need to do, and what I have tried to practice, is to start reframing the story, recrafting it into a different direction, which, that's the way great stories go, don't they? Like the main character in a story starts out on some adventure and things go badly. And if things didn't go badly, most of the time the story would be boring and they wouldn't learn anything. They wouldn't have this great heroic experience because everything went smoothly. So, but then things change for the character in the story. They learn lessons, they overcome challenges. The story goes in a radically different direction from where it was for a while. And so that's kind of the way I look at the way we can face these stories that we have that maybe aren't helpful, is that's okay. That's just leading up to the turning point in the tension of the narrative. Now we're going to change it to where we're overcoming the challenge. The big battle's ahead, and now we're going to redo this. And as it turned out for me, that started out looking like one thing and kind of ended up turning into something else. It was kind of interesting. For the next, I'm going to say at least a couple of weeks after I met Eric and Lori and stayed with them and all that happened there, I would get a message from them every few days, just something nice and encouraging usually. And, they started following me on Instagram, seeing my pictures, and they were like, oh, we're loving the pictures. Keep sending them. By the way, I never told them this story, the background of what happened the day I met them. I still haven't told them this. So they were just being who they were. Their narrative was responding to me as a person and my narratives. And it was, a very nice, friendly, encouraging, positive sort of thing. Well, working our way further north, I finally get to almost the border of California and Oregon. And right near there is Mount Shasta. There's the mountain itself, and then there's a town called Mount Shasta. And went into Mount Shasta to resupply, and ended up a whole bunch of my hiker friends and I spent the night there. So before I go back on the trail, I decided to do one last check to see if I've got any messages. So I check, and there's a message from Lori. And so what I didn't mention earlier about Lori is that she is the president of a small college here in the United States. And she sends me this text message and says, "Hey, after your hike, what would you think about coming to our college and teaching a class on mindful photography?" And I was like, don't sound too eager. Don't sound too eager. Wait for at least the second ring before you pick up, that kind of thing. I was immediately incredibly excited by the idea. I had, in the conversation that I had with her there at their home, I kind of expressed to her my approach to photography and how I feel about it and how I try to use photography. So she extends this invitation to me to come to their college and actually share with other people what my approach is for photography and how I try to take pictures and how I try to, create a sense of intimacy with the subject I'm photographing and all of that. And how I try to show people that there's beauty everywhere. So I ended up responding back to her, saying, yeah, I'd like to talk about that. That sounds really interesting. Because like I said, I didn't want to sound too eager. We continue this conversation, and the end result of it is that I've been invited to come to this school. It's a college in Ohio, a small college, and I'm going to do an artist in residency there. Going to work with some of their students directly and helping them it's a climate change class. And then I'm also going to be doing some talks and some workshops on photography, on long distance hiking. Weirdly enough, I'm going to get to share with a bunch of people my photography and the message I have, which was how this all started to begin with, that I thought that was just not going to happen. I'm incredibly thrilled with this opportunity. I don't want to say the name of the college because I haven't cleared with anybody there about this as far as like saying anything. But this opportunity is very exciting to me. And now I'm realizing that I've got another narrative that I've got to adjust a little bit. So I guess part of the lesson here is that it's an ongoing work. You don't arrive on this. It's a continual progress of growth, because now I'm like, well, now I'm having imposter syndrome, which of course is also a narrative. And so I guess that's probably pretty normal when you're excited about an opportunity, but it's kind of a big deal. So yeah, that's the current project, is recrafting the narrative of imposter syndrome that I'm experiencing a little bit. It's not overwhelming, but there's a little bit of it there. Mm-hmm. A little bit of like, am I really up to this? I'm going to, speak to these people. All these people are going to be looking at my photography and all this, but that's the work in progress now, is to recraft that part of the narrative.
So you're on the trail. I just want to kind of bring this down and recap a little bit. You're on the trail. The last time we talked to you, when you did the AT, the Appalachian Trail, you talked about this emerging theme for your life, for your work, for your essence. As you move through the world, you want to bring this message and embody the idea that beauty is everywhere. You get on this new trail this year, the Pacific Crest Trail. You're hiking from Mexico to Canada. You're in California. You're at the Donner Pass area. You have this beautiful experience, this beauty is everywhere moment. On July 4th, you're looking over Lake Tahoe. There's fireworks. You're drinking wine. You're eating cheese. You're in this beautiful scenic view. The next morning you wake up and you feel awful. You feel terrible. You're miserable, and you have this realization. The misery comes from this realization, oh, no one gives a shit about what I have to say. I've got this message about beauty is everywhere. Does anyone even care about this? This message, this embodiment as an INFP, you're going to embody your message. This embodiment, who you are, is part of this message, right? You're moving through the world as who you are. Beauty is everywhere. And here you're in a funk, and you're like, man, I don't know if the universe cares, if anyone else cares, and you're starting to feel very down about it. And in the midst of that feeling, of feeling despondent, of feeling like this realization, like maybe what I'm doing doesn't matter at all, there is beauty in that moment. Beauty really is everywhere, even in the down moments of your life, the depths of feeling like, is this worth it? Does anyone care? Does the universe care? There's this beautiful moment. You run into this couple, these people who take you in, show you hospitality, show you kindness, share resource with you, help you feel better about your day, your experience, and not just in the moment, but now throughout the experience of meeting them, an opportunity's arisen, something that you didn't expect to have happen. You're now invited to come to a college, a university, a college, I'm not exactly sure what it is, but it's an institution, educational institution here in the United States, to basically talk about the very thing at that moment on July 5th of this year that you didn't think anybody cared about. Not only do people care about it, they're basically hiring you or bringing you in and sharing more resource with you to talk about the very thing that you're passionate about, the thing that is in your essence.
Yeah, it's been such an amazing and powerful experience to have this happen, of like that deep, deep low, and then how it turned out reframed a lot of stuff for me. The idea of the narratives, and then another kind of a sub theme, of this is, if you want opportunities to grow yourself and to really be impactful, whatever the thing is that you're excited about, if you want those opportunities, your odds improve dramatically by doing the things that drive you and the things that you love. Find ways to be in the midst of that and the energy of other people who are excited about similar kinds of things. And that's where opportunities can come from. I would not have had this opportunity to go do this if I hadn't have been on this adventure. If I hadn't have said yes to going for a ride with this couple, even though I was wanting to avoid people, if I hadn't have said yes to accepting their hospitality to go to their home, if I had quit right after that, even if I had accepted all that, I doubt they would have extended this invitation to me. So that's where the power came from, is being out there, being in motion, and putting forth the effort to pursue the things that I love, that drive me, that excite me. And what do you know? Opportunities show up. Who knows where this could go forward, but if it doesn't go anywhere, it's still a wonderful thing to be able to do. I'm still so excited just to have this chance.
Well, and one thing we haven't mentioned is that you're not independently wealthy. Like, in order to subsidize these trips, you do work, you bank what you make, and then you go do a hiking trip. And then when you get off the trail, you go work, you bank it, and then you go on a hiking trip. And so this opportunity, in the past, what you've had to do were things that weren't in alignment necessarily with your mission. You took gig work. You did what you had to do to bank money to be able to go on these trips. And you pushing through a really down, dark time period, basically kind of a little form of a mini existential crisis. You pushing through that means that now when you're going to go work during the time period between the trails, because you're planning on another one next year, right? Yeah. Yeah,
I'm currently planning to do the Continental Divide Trail in 2019.
Right. And so this time, what's nice about it is that you're able to do a little bit of work to bank for the next trail that is completely in alignment with what you want to be doing. So it's not like you're just independently wealthy and these are all just fun experiences. You've got the safety net and these are fun experiences you get to do. Like, this now means that maybe when you are subsidizing the thing you really want to do, which is hike, maybe the thing you're subsidizing with is actually the thing you want to be doing, which is teaching people the reason why you have this passion. And so it's like you said, doing the thing that you're passionate about, even though you have to subsidize this. Like, you have to work really hard in the off season to be able to have the resource to be able to go do this thing. And you're willing to do that. You're willing to go work hard in something that is not nearly as satisfying, something maybe outside of the range of this, in order to make sure that you can follow your passion. And by doing that, these opportunities are now starting to, 2 hikes later, right? Years later, the opportunities to be more in alignment with your mission in subsidizing the trips now are starting to present themselves. So I think it's such a great, we're talking about narratives and stories, but also it's such a great example of using those empowering narratives and stories to keep pushing through, so that life and the quote unquote universe is able to reinforce exactly what it wants from you, right? The universe is like, oh, you think I don't care? Well, maybe, but what happens if you go teach at this college the thing that you're in love with, right? And so it's like you're able to vet whether or not your stories are true, right? And of course, we're talking about these narratives and stories as not being empirically true either way, but you've been able to vet it. You said the universe doesn't give a crap. And then the universe went, well, what if I throw you a bone and you get to teach at a college? What about that? So you actually got to put it to the test by being out there and following your, pushing through the dark days and following your passion no matter what. And now the universe gets to respond back to you exactly how it does feel about your message.
I think that moment you had actually was the universe asking you a question. Antonia and I have talked about this. I don't think we've talked about it on the podcast before. This idea of are you sure button the universe throws up to us. I think the universe does. It's not really a thing, right? But I kind of using it as like a stand-in. In my old days of being a Christian, I would be using the word God right now. So we're like throwing universe in there as kind of a replacement. There's two fronts to this. I think there's this test that you're given when something epic is about to happen that I've noticed in my life, and I could be overvaluing my own experience, but I've talked to other people. It's those dark nights of the soul, those moments when you're questioning, is this worth it? And you're having some of the worst time of it, that a breakthrough is just on the other side. There's like this, almost like there's like a calm before the storm, but in a reverse, right? It's like the terrible feelings before the positives come. I've had this happen so many times where I've had this terrible depression or terrible down cycle of a day or two, and then all of a sudden on like day 3, something amazing happens. And I'm like, where did this come from? Back in my Christian days, I would have called that a conspiracy of grace. I don't know what I call it now. I guess conspiracy of the universe. It's almost like these synchronicities that happen in our lives. And there's like this down cycle and you think it's all going to be over, and then boom, something else happens. So I think there's one thing there, and then it's a test, because it's like, are you going to follow through with your rules, Dan? Well, you said you're going to say yes to everything. Well, I'm the universe here, quote unquote, whatever that entity is, and I'm going to basically set it up to where you feel like crap, you don't think anybody gives a shit, and I'm going to test to see if you really are going to follow this rule of saying yes to anything that comes along. Or are you just going to get into your shell and shrink back from, putting yourself out there and saying yes to the things you said you're going to say yes to? I'm going to test this, and if you say yes to this, well, the reward at the other side is going to be an opportunity for you. I mean, I guess I'm projecting my narrative of this onto this, right? But this is how I see it. As I move through the world and magic happens around me, this is the kind of narrative that I see emerging for myself.
Well, somebody's got to speak for the universe, so it might as well be Joel Marquette.
That's right. Exactly, right?
Here, representing the universe, Joel Marquette.
He certainly does. On a regular basis. But I think what you were about to say, Joel, is that you and I, between the two of us, we call that the "Are you sure" button. Like right before the opportunity comes, the universe or a conspiracy or whatever is setting us on certain trajectories, we get an opportunity to hit the "You are sure" button. Like when you're downloading software and your computer goes, yeah, are you sure you want to download this? Because once we download it, it's gonna take up some real estate here. And we have to say yes or no. And I think that sometimes these opportunities come, but right before that, we get a "Are you sure" button. And if we click yes, then we get the opportunity. And if we say no, well, then maybe we lost it.
Yeah, I've definitely had the same kind of things happen more than just this time. I'm not going to go into all the other stories because that would be like 6 podcasts worth of talking. But that pattern has certainly held true in my case of there's been these moments when I'm like, this is the bottom. This is absolutely the bottom. And whatever, it's a principle, it's something that makes you keep going. And then shortly afterwards, wow, something amazing comes up, or the direction changes radically. You definitely have had that.
For you listening, when you have these empowering rules for your life, or you have these notions of what you want to do, and those challenges come in where you feel terrible, you feel like I just can't go another step. Do I really have to follow my own personal rule right now? What if I didn't say yes to everything, like Dan talked about? Or, yeah, I did say I was going to go to the gym 4 days a week, but what if I just didn't go this week? Or, yeah, I decided I was going to start doing this habit over here, but what if I just like cheated this one day on it and just didn't do it? There's these elements of opportunities for us to stick with things, the stick-to-itness. And in our culture, in our lives, especially here in the West, this is not supported by culture. Like, it is definitely something that, look, if you don't feel like doing it, treat yourself. Don't do it, man. Just indulge. Just take the easy hit. Don't put the effort into it. Don't put the extra work into something. There's a culture of that in our world that allows us to, quote unquote, get off the hook easy, right? And I don't think life has to be miserable, but there are these different things that we have that come up, the opportunities for us to shine and to show what we're made of. And I think, Dan, from your story, it's inspiring to me. The zoom in I think the moment that I zoom in on your story that is the most poignant for me is the moment when you obeyed a rule you had set up for yourself, because if you had followed your feelings in that moment, you would not have made the same choice. You would have probably figured another way into town, and you might have missed, and we don't know what this opportunity is going to lead to. It could be changing the entire trajectory of your life, or it could just be a one-off opportunity. We don't know. Either way, it's exciting for you. And yet, just imagine, had you not followed that rule, the kind of decision you would have made, and this opportunity probably wouldn't have come into your realm.
Well, and to sort of piggyback off of what you just said, Joel, I think that in this culture, I think we do have a little bit of a self-indulgent streak, but I think even more so, what I've noticed is that people wait for opportunities first, and then if the opportunity comes, then they'll do the hard work, right? Like, the hard work follows the opportunity. It's not that the hard work comes and then the opportunity, or the hard work gets invested in first and then the opportunities come through the hard work. This actually is, interestingly enough, we had a podcast not too long ago with our COO, Kojo. And he was talking about it in a very ENTJ way, this concept of career capital. And I remember getting a few emails and responses in from INFPs that said that didn't really resonate with them. Like, this idea of the career capital and just doing it and making it happen. And then, like that just felt too extroverted thinking to them. But what's funny is that I'm hearing the exact same message in this podcast from an INFP. What I'm hearing is, you stay in alignment with yourself. You stay in alignment with your mission. You do things that are hard. You subsidize it by doing stuff you don't particularly want to do. And if you stay on that trajectory, then the opportunities manifest. And it's almost an identical conversation. He's in ENTJ, so he's using words like career capital, and he's using words like, just take opportunities when you can and reach out to people and network and go have coffee chats. He's talking about it in sort of like be proactive and try to build resource in order to be able to get the thing you want later, and don't be so focused on passion. You as an INFP right now are saying, be focused on passion, but recognize you're still going to have to do all that dirty work. You're still going to have to, build the capital. For him, he was talking about career capital. For you, it's subsidizing the trips, right? So you're still going to have to build the capital to go do the thing you want. And you're going to have to build your network by saying yes to people and being willing to receive kindness. And you're going to have to get through really dark nights of the soul and moments that you don't particularly want to do something. And you're going to have to do all this stuff before the opportunities come. So it's actually the same conversation, but from two very different personality types, right? One is more of a extroverted thinking, build your resource, and one is more of an introverted feeling, like be in alignment. And in both cases, it's a matter of pushing through the tough times in order to get the thing you want later, because the opportunities follow the work.
Yeah, it's absolutely what I've experienced in that regard. You can't expect the opportunities to just show up at your door and then like, oh, there's an opportunity, I'll just work for that. I've tried that, I know, and it doesn't work. Opportunities come from all different kinds of resources and locations, but being in motion and putting the work is what you do to make those show up for you. And then the other thing that I've realized in all this is the importance of people supporting you along the way in lots of different ways. Joel, you were mentioning how like our culture and kind of like makes it easy for us to not pursue the hard work and to not say, yes, I'm ready, to push are you sure button. It makes it easy to kind of put it off and all that. And that I would agree with that, but that doesn't mean there aren't people who will encourage you to push the the I am sure button. And so just like on a personal level, I wanted to say this because there's a number of people in this audience in the PH community who I've made friends with, either just casually like through online or actually formed real life friendships with, who have been super supportive of me on my journeys. They follow along on Facebook and Instagram and whatever, and they send me messages and super, super encouraging and positive. I've gotten more help than I can explain or can express from just the encouragement and the support of some of those who are listening. Some of them I've had the opportunity to meet up with in various places. There were some other ones that I wanted to on this hike and it just didn't work out timing wise, but they still, we got some encouraging messages to me and all of that. And so that support of the people along your way, don't underestimate that. I know, I've gotten a ton of support from that. And one of the people that I made really good friends with, that was my hiking partner, introduced her to your podcast. So she's now enjoying the whole PH community and what you have to say. So hi, Patches. There's a wealth of support for all this out there. You got to look for the communities where it's there, because it's not necessarily everywhere in culture, but there's a lot of it there if you look for it.
This is fantastic. We're going to put a link to, if you're okay with it, Dan, like your Instagram and some places people can follow along with your journeys, because you've had people that have followed along with you sharing your photography, sharing your journeys, and it's something that people vicariously, even if they can't hike. I know on the AT, on the Appalachian Trail, you had people that kind of did some short hikes with you along that journey. And maybe there's an opportunity for you listening, if you're interested, hanging out with Dan at some point on one of his journeys, wherever you're going to be. I think after you finish these 3 trails in the United States, your dream is to take this overseas and other different places. So I don't think the journeys are going to stop. There's an adventure ahead of you for many years to come. So we're going to put the links in the show notes right below this podcast. And speaking of that, I think we can kind of wind down here. Thanks, by the way, Dan, for being on with us. I think it was a really great conversation.
Thank you. I had a great time.
Yeah, and we'll keep checking in with you as you keep doing these adventures. We kind of every, once a year or so, we have you on the show to share some of the insights and things out in the great world of living what I call the INFP dream, being a professional hiker out in nature, getting to express yourself through your art, your photography, and now getting to teach and share with other people. I think it's a fantastic life that you've crafted for yourself. So speaking of, coming to look at Dan's link and follow what he's doing, come over to personalityhacker.com. We want you to share your story directly below this podcast. There's an opportunity for you to ask questions, to give your support to Dan if you want to give him a supportive message below this show, or if you have a question for him about what he's doing, he could then answer those questions and be a part of giving you some feedback of what it's like out on the trail. He's got a lot of posts he's made about what trail life is like and all this, and maybe you want to talk to him about that. But we'd love to hear your story of some of the things we talked about on this podcast. How are they impacting you? Have you had experience with some of these ideas? Have you noticed the universe or God or whatever conspiring to have a "you are here" or "are you sure" button that you have to push before a big thing happens in your life? Have you had that experience? Are you in a dark night of the soul right now? What's that like? We'd love to hear where you're at and what you're experiencing in your journey. I think stories are important. So come over to Personality Hacker and leave us your story directly below this show.
Yeah, and if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you'd leave us a rating and review on iTunes, that helps us out a lot. And also remember, our book is out. So go check out a copy of the Personality Hacker book. You can get it on Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, or you can order it at your local bookstore. That's our preference. And if you would leave us a rating and review on Amazon once you've read it, that would also help us out a lot.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Thanks to Dan as our guest. We will talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.